This is a Delta III Russian nuclear submarine. We are going to launch a rocket called Volna in order to deliver a satellite called Cosmos-1. Is this going to work? Well, in real life it didn't work, but in this game it might. Welcome to What the Math. And so today we're talking about a project called Cosmos-1. This was a project by Cosmos Studios in collaboration with Planetary Society, both of which are actually non-government, non-profit organizations that anyone can join that are basically space advocates. They are trying to promote space exploration, and Planetary Society was even co-founded by Carl Sagan back in 1980. So it's a pretty awesome NGO to actually consider joining. Anyway, so in 2005, they've decided they wanted to launch a rocket that would carry a satellite called Cosmos-1, which was basically a test of solar sails, which is a pretty awesome test, I think, because solar sails, if you don't know anything about them, is an ability to use solar wind and solar radiation to propel a spacecraft using no other propulsion. So basically, it's kind of like using the actual wind sails, but instead we're using a solar radiation and solar winds to try to get into outer space. And this idea has been around for a very long time, but it was not until 2005 that we could actually officially try to test it. But because launching rockets is really expensive, the only opportunity for Cosmos Studios and Planetary Society to launch such rocket was, of course, by using a much cheaper design. And here specifically, they decided to go with the Russian nuclear submarine that was able to launch Volna rockets that were actually submarine-launched ballistic missiles that were redesigned to try to deliver smaller payloads into suborbital trajectory. And because these Volna missiles could actually be launched from anywhere in the world as long as there was ocean of some sort, it actually created a really interesting mobile rocket launching platform that could essentially go anywhere on the planet, position itself, and launch a satellite from any inclination that was necessary for this particular satellite. So for example, if you wanted to launch a satellite with an equatorial orbit, all you had to do is basically position the submarine on the equator and then launch the satellite from there. And of course, launching it from equator also gives you a little bit more delta V boost, because at this location, the surface of our planet spins a lot faster than it does in the north, meaning that you do get an extra little bit of a boost of about 1,000 kilometers per hour, which also means that you can place slightly larger payloads into space by launching rockets from this location. And what you're basically seeing is me recreating this kind of a design, but of course the submarine is much smaller than it is in real life, because Kerbal Space Program doesn't really allow us to build submarines the way they are in real life. And so here I decided to just kind of recreate a smaller submarine and launch a rocket by boosting its nose up and then trying to launch it into space. It was actually a relatively difficult procedure, but there was no other way to launch the actual rocket. And in real life, they launched from this location on the submarine right here. You can actually see, here's a picture of a rocket being launched from this particular submarine. And so this satellite was essentially the test of future propulsion. And this particular design actually had 8 different sail blades that could be deployed from the central location, and then they would inflate and be released from the central location. Each of them was about 15 meters long, and the total area was about 600 square meters, which is actually pretty large. And so here the goal of this mission was to first launch this satellite into about 800 kilometer orbit, and then the sails would open up and gradually, very slowly, over a 30-day period, would raise the orbit to a much higher plane. And specifically, they were looking at about 100 kilometers higher than the original orbit, so from 800 to about 900 kilometers. And that's obviously because the actual propulsion you get from the solar wind is not particularly high, but you do get free propulsion, which is actually pretty awesome. And what these sails are made from is a similar material that I talked about in the previous video where I talked about the Echo project, and it's called mylar. It's actually a material that was invented in the early 60s in the US, and by accident people discovered that it had this really strange effect where solar wind would actually push it away from the sun, and so this is how we discovered the solar wind effect. And had this mission been successful, we would also be able to actually see this craft in the sky with just naked eye. It's actually big enough for us to actually see it because of the reflection of the sun from the solar sails. So you could actually possibly even see it from anywhere on the planet as long as it was dark enough for you to observe it. But the actual physics behind the solar sail propulsion is essentially photons colliding with the sail and basically acting on it and essentially just pushing it away from the sun. And even though the acceleration is actually relatively small, it's something along the lines of 0.0005 meters per second square. It does allow you to basically continuously accelerate the craft as long as it's positioned in the right way and as long as the sails are actually open. But obviously you would want to close the sails when the craft is flying toward the sun, because that would actually create the opposite effect of slowing down the craft. And here, interestingly, over 1 day period, you could easily get delta V about 45 meters per second. And in 100 days, you could easily get 4.5 kilometers per second. So that's actually a lot. That means after just a year of orbiting and using the solar sail propulsion, you could easily get about anywhere between 14 and 17 kilometers per second. And that also means that after about 3 years, you would easily reach the escape velocity of our solar system. So you can actually create a craft similar to Voyager and use solar sails to accelerate it enough around the orbit of our planet to have it escape into the outer solar system. And to make this even more effective, what we could actually do in the future is potentially propel the craft toward the sun first, decreasing its periapsis, maybe making it closer to orbit of Mercury. And then as it starts moving away from the sun, you open the sails, and that's when you get the highest possible acceleration. So after about 2-3 years of sailing away from the sun, the speed would be anywhere between 100 to possibly even higher, to up to 200 kilometers per second by the time that craft reaches Jupiter. And that's of course without wasting any other propulsion and without wasting any other materials, and is essentially done with nothing else but the solar radiation itself. Now, the design that you do actually get to see here is not Cosmos 1. It's actually based on a design that's going to be launched sometime next year in 2016. And this design is called Lightsail-1. There was actually a smaller test earlier this year on May 20th of 2015. But unfortunately, it didn't really work as planned. And so even though it was launched and did deploy some of its sail, we didn't really get to test the solar radiation effects, and it did re-enter atmosphere shortly after. But if the 2016 mission is successful, we might actually kickstart a completely new way of exploring the solar system, and this may even lead to a new explosion of new potential craft designs that will use solar sails to basically get to other planets. So I'm definitely looking forward to this 2016 mission, because if it is successful, this will actually create an opportunity for other organizations, but also possibly other governments like NASA and Russian Space Agency to try to create some kind of a solar sail satellite and then launch it and explore the solar system that way. So if you want to learn more about Cosmos 1 and also Lightsail-1 missions, I posted the links in the description below that kind of explain the basics, the mission profiles, and also the structural designs of these crafts, so you can actually explore them in more detail there. But for this mission that I have here in Kerbal Space Program, what I wanted to achieve is essentially launch a rocket that could place a satellite in low Kerbal orbit. But I wanted to use a submarine for that. And here, even though it's not technically a submarine, but just a ship, it is actually a design that ended up being quite successful. I was able to continuously launch these rockets with only minor crashes. And basically, in order for me to launch this particular rocket, I had to first lift its nose by using 2 pairs of engines that are actually inside the tank that basically use some of the fuel to lift its nose first. And then once you launch the rocket, it's actually pretty easy to get to the orbit and then release the satellite. So maybe this is something I'll use again in the future by trying to launch some other similar project. But interestingly, I actually did not even know about the Volna rockets until very recently. So this is a really interesting way of trying to convert ICBMs that are basically meant for destruction into something that's used more for exploration of space and for something more creative. And I actually thought it was a pretty good idea to try to use these aging and somewhat outdated submarines to try to launch rockets into space instead. And apparently it's several times cheaper to launch rockets from the submarines than it is from the actual space platform, and it's very likely that many other future missions will use these launch platforms for their satellite projects as well. Anyway, so this is it for this particular mission, and I just wanted to see how the solar sail actually survived the re-entry. And even though my solar panels got destroyed completely, the solar sail actually did survive and even had a bit of a glide near the end. So I kind of wonder if you could possibly even glide these down to a surface without crashing them, but maybe this is something I'll try in the next video. So this is it for this video, and thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you did enjoy it, like it and also share it with your friends. Also, don't forget to check out some of the other Kerbal Space Program videos I posted, specifically videos about the history of spaceflight. That is a continuous project that will be going on for many months, where I'm going to try to cover as many missions, and I'm talking about real-life missions that actually did occur in history. Also, check out some of the other space videos I posted on my channel, and subscribe if you love space videos. Thank you for watching, and as always, game you later, guys, and bye-bye.